The gunshot pierced the dawn silence as Tallulah James sprinted through the dusty streets of Marfa, Texas, her heart pounding against her ribcage like a wild Mustang. The year was 1878, and she had just robbed the man who had destroyed her family not for money, but for the incriminating letters that could clear her father's name. She clutched the leather satchel to her chest as her boots kicked up clouds of dust, the sound of hooves thundering behind her growing louder with each ragged breath she took. Tallulah ducked into an alley between the general store and the blacksmith shop, pressing her back against the rough wooden wall as sweat trickled down her temple. At 22, she had spent the past 3 years on the run, moving from town to town across the vast expanse of the Texas frontier, always one step ahead of the men who hunted her and the past that refused to let her go. "You can't hide forever, Tallulah." The voice of Victor Holdsworth, her former employer and the man who had framed her father for embezzlement, echoed through the streets. "I own half the lawmen in this territory." She closed her eyes, willing her breathing to steady. The letters in her satchel proved that Victor had stolen from his own bank and planted evidence on her father, who had died in prison awaiting a trial that never came. Justice was within her grasp, but first she needed to escape Marfa alive. As the footsteps of Victor's men grew closer, a strong hand suddenly clamped over her mouth. Tallulah's eyes flew open in terror as she was pulled backward through a hidden door she hadn't noticed. "Don't scream," a deep voice whispered in her ear as the door closed silently in front of them. "I'm trying to help you." The hand slowly released her, and Tallulah spun around, her fingers already wrapped around the small derringer concealed in her skirt pocket. In the dim light filtering through the cracks of what appeared to be a storage room, she found herself face to face with a tall man with sun-bronzed skin, piercing blue eyes, and a weathered Stetson pushed back on his head. "Who are you?" she demanded, keeping her voice low but not lowering her gun. The stranger raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. "Name's Ryder Daniels, and you've stirred up quite a hornet's nest, Miss James." Tallulah's breath caught. "How do you know my name? In a town like Marfa, news travels faster than a prairie fire." His eyes held hers steadily. "I know Victor Holdsworth is a snake, and I know he's been hunting you across 3 counties. What I don't know is why you'd be fool enough to walk right into his den." Outside, boots pounded past the hiding place as men shouted to each other. Tallulah tensed, but Ryder remained perfectly still, his gaze never leaving her face. "I had my reasons," she said, finally lowering the derringer but not putting it away. "I'm sure you did." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "But unless you want to explain those reasons to the undertaker, you'd best come with me. I've got horses ready behind the livery." "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Ryder's expression hardened. "I know Holdsworth. That's enough." He moved toward another door at the back of the storage room. "Now, are you coming or not? This offer expires when those men circle back." Tallulah hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Lead the way, Mr. Daniels." They slipped out the back door into a narrow passage between buildings. Ryder moved with the quiet confidence of a man who knew every inch of the terrain, guiding her through a series of turns until they reached the back of the livery stable. 2 horses stood saddled and waiting, a powerful chestnut stallion and a dappled gray mare. "You planned this," Tallulah said, eyeing him with renewed suspicion. "Let's just say I've been watching Holdsworth for some time." Ryder checked the cinch on the gray's saddle. "Can you ride?" "Born in the saddle," she replied, gathering her skirts and mounting with practiced ease despite her fatigue. Ryder swung onto the chestnut. "We'll head south toward the Davis Mountains. There's places to hide there that only a few know about." As they urged their horses into a canter away from town, Tallulah glanced back at the rising sun silhouetting Marfa behind them. She had come to town with a purpose to collect evidence and then deliver it to the territorial judge in El Paso. But now she was fleeing once again, this time with a mysterious stranger who claimed to be an enemy of her enemy. "Mr. Daniels," she called over the drumming of hooves, "I appreciate your help, but I need to get to El Paso." "You won't make it to El Paso if Holdsworth's men catch you first," he replied without slowing. "Trust me on this, Miss James. One day at a time, trust." The word stuck in her throat like a bone. She hadn't trusted anyone since her father died, since her mother wasted away from grief shortly after, since her younger brother disappeared into the vast orphanage system of the West. But something about Ryder Daniels' straightforward manner and the way he had risked himself to help her stirred something long dormant in her chest. They rode hard until midday, when Ryder finally signaled a stop near a small creek sheltered by cottonwood trees. As the horses drank, Tallulah splashed cold water on her face, washing away dust and dried sweat. "How long have you been running?" Ryder asked, dropping to one knee beside the creek. Tallulah stiffened. "What makes you think I'm running?" His eyes, the color of the Texas sky, met hers. "I recognize the look. It's in your eyes. The constant glancing over your shoulder, the way you've got one foot already in the stirrup even when you're standing still." He filled a canteen with water. "I know because I used to have that same look." Something in his tone made Tallulah relax slightly. 3 years, she admitted. "Since my father died in a territorial prison for something he didn't do." Ryder nodded slowly. "Holdsworth's work. He owned the bank where my father was head clerk. When money went missing, Victor made sure the evidence pointed to my father." She unconsciously touched the satchel. "But I've been gathering proof that Victor was behind it all." "That's why you were in his office this morning." It wasn't a question, but Tallulah nodded anyway. "Those papers prove everything. Names, dates, amounts. My father kept a secret ledger." "And you plan to take them to Judge Patterson in El Paso." Ryder handed her the canteen. "It's a good plan except for one thing." "What's that?" "Patterson is in Holdsworth's pocket too." Ryder's expression was grim. "You'd be walking straight into a trap." The hope that had sustained Tallulah for 3 years seemed to crack and splinter. "Then what am I supposed to do? Who can I turn to if the law itself is corrupt?" Ryder stood, brushing dust from his worn denim pants. "There's a federal marshal I know, man named Isaiah Cooper. He's been building a case against corruption in the territory for years. He'd be interested in what you have." "Where can I find him?" "He moves around, but I know where he'll be in 3 days' time." Ryder checked the horizon, scanning for dust clouds that might signal pursuers. "If we can stay ahead of Holdsworth until then, I can get you to Cooper." Tallulah studied him, trying to decipher his motivations. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Daniels? What's your stake in bringing down Holdsworth?" A shadow passed over Ryder's face. "Let's just say we have history." "That's not an answer. It's all you get for now." He moved to check the horses. "We should keep moving." Tallulah grabbed his arm, surprised by her own boldness. "I'm putting my life in your hands. I deserve to know who you are." For a moment she thought he would pull away, but instead Ryder sighed. "Holdsworth was responsible for my brother's death. 5 years ago, there was a dispute over land rights. My family's ranch had water that Holdsworth wanted for his cattle. When we wouldn't sell, accidents started happening." His jaw tightened. "My brother was found dead after a supposed riding accident. No witnesses." "I'm sorry," Tallulah said softly. "I've been gathering evidence too, Miss James. Not enough to bring him down yet, but with what you have." He looked at her satchel. "Together, we might just have a chance to see justice done." In that moment, Something shifted between them, an understanding, a common purpose that transcended their brief acquaintance. They were two souls marked by the same man's cruelty, both seeking redemption and justice in a harsh land where such things often remained elusive. "Then we'd best keep moving, Mr. Daniels," Tallulah said, moving toward her horse. "Ryder," he corrected her. "If we're going to be fugitives together, we might as well use first names." A small smile touched her lips for the first time in what felt like years. "Tallulah, then." They mounted up and continued south, the vast Texas landscape unfolding before them like a sun-bleached canvas. As they rode, Tallulah found herself studying her unexpected ally. Ryder Daniels sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man born to the saddle. His lean frame moved in perfect rhythm with the chestnut's gait, and though he seemed relaxed, she noticed how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert to any danger. By late afternoon, the terrain had grown more rugged as they approached the foothills of the Davis Mountains. The sparse vegetation of the plains gave way to juniper and pinyon pine, offering more cover but also more places for potential ambush. "There's a lined shack about an hour ahead," Ryder said as they paused to rest the horses again. "Old place belonging to the Mendez family. They won't mind us using it for the night. You seem to know this country well," Tallulah observed. "Grew up not far from here." A hint of nostalgia softened his features. "My pa ran cattle through these hills for 30 years before Holdsworth schemes drove him out." "Is your father still alive?" Ryder nodded. "Living with my sister in Arizona Territory now, safer there." As they continued their journey, the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in vivid oranges and reds. The temperature dropped quickly, and Tallulah pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders. "Cold?" Ryder asked, noticing the gesture. "I've endured worse," she replied, thinking of the nights she'd spent sleeping rough when money ran out. He studied her face for a moment, then without a word, he reined in his horse and dismounted. From his saddlebag, he withdrew a rolled woolen blanket, which he handed to her once he'd remounted. "Don't need you catching your death before we reach Cooper," he said gruffly. Tallulah wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you." They rode in companionable silence as twilight deepened into night. The first stars appeared, brilliant pinpricks in the vast Texas sky, and a crescent moon rose to cast pale silver light across the landscape. The lined shack, when they reached it, was little more than a one-room structure with a small corral attached, but to Tallulah, it looked like a palace. They unsaddled the horses in silence, working together with an efficiency that belied their short acquaintance. Inside, Ryder lit a lantern that hung from a ceiling beam, revealing a sparse interior. A small cast iron stove, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. A layer of dust covered everything, but the place was sound and dry. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel," Ryder said, setting his saddle bags on the table, "but it'll keep us out of the elements." Tallulah moved to the stove, checking it for functionality. "I can cook something if there are supplies." Ryder produced a small sack of coffee, some jerky, and a few potatoes from his saddlebags. "Not a feast, but it'll fill the belly." While Ryder went to check the perimeter, Tallulah busied herself getting a fire going in the stove. The familiar routine of domestic tasks steadied her nerves. For 3 years, she'd been constantly moving, taking odd jobs as a seamstress, laundress, or cook, whatever would earn enough to keep her going and allow her to continue gathering evidence against Holdsworth. The simple act of preparing a meal, even one as basic as this, felt almost like a return to normality. When Ryder returned, he found her slicing the potatoes with a small knife she'd produced from her boot. "You're full of surprises, Tallulah James," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. She didn't look up from her task. A woman alone learns to be prepared, and to hide knives in her boots, apparently. That earned him a quick smile. Among other places, they ate their simple meal in relative silence, both too exhausted for unnecessary conversation. The coffee was strong and bitter, the jerky tough, but the fried potatoes added substance to their improvised supper. "You take the cot," Ryder said when they'd finished eating. "I'll sleep by the door." Tallulah frowned. "There's room enough for both of us." "I'm not much for sharing beds with strangers, Miss James," he replied, a touch of humor in his voice. "Besides, someone should keep watch." "We're not strangers anymore," she pointed out. "And you need rest as much as I do. We can take turns watching." He considered her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. You sleep first. I'll wake you in 4 hours." Too tired to argue further, Tallulah removed her boots and jacket, then lay down on the narrow cot, pulling Ryder's woolen blanket over her. The rough mattress felt like heaven after days of sleeping on the ground during her journey to Marfa. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come immediately. She watched through half-closed eyes as Ryder moved quietly around the shack, checking the window, testing the door latch, cleaning his revolver with practiced movements. There was something comforting in his methodical vigilance. "Why didn't you ever go after Holdsworth yourself?" she asked suddenly. "For your brother," Ryder paused in his tasks, not looking at her. "I did at first. Almost got myself killed. That's when I realized revenge wouldn't bring Luke back, but justice might prevent others from suffering the same fate." He resumed cleaning his gun. "So I started working smarter instead of angrier." "Is that why you helped me? Because I fit into your plan for justice?" Now he did look at her, his expression unreadable in the lantern's dim light. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do. The fact that you might help bring down Holdsworth is providential." Tallulah considered this. "I've been alone in this for so long," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm chasing ghosts." "Your father deserves to have his name cleared," Ryder said firmly. "And Holdsworth deserves to face consequences." "That's not chasing ghosts, Tallulah. That's seeking justice." His words settled over her like a bomb. For years, she had doubted herself, questioned whether her quest was merely a daughter's inability to accept her father's guilt. To hear someone else affirm the righteousness of her cause stirred emotions she had kept carefully locked away. "Thank you," she murmured, turning her face toward the wall to hide the sudden moisture in her eyes. Ryder seemed to sense her need for privacy. "Get some sleep," he said gently. "Tomorrow will come too soon." And it did. Tallulah woke to Ryder's hand on her shoulder, the first pale light of dawn filtering through the shack's single window. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was, reaching instinctively for her derringer. "Easy," Ryder said, stepping back. "Just me." Tallulah sat up, pushing her tangled hair from her face. "I overslept. You were supposed to wake me for my watch." "You needed the rest more than I needed sleep," he replied, already moving to stoke the fire in the stove. "Coffee's almost ready." "That wasn't the agreement," she said, pulling on her boots. "Consider it a courtesy that won't be repeated." There was a hint of amusement in his eyes. "I value my sleep too much to make a habit of it." They shared a quick breakfast of coffee and the last of the jerky, then set about preparing to leave. Tallulah washed her face in a basin of water Ryder had brought in, then twisted her hair into a practical bun at the nape of her neck. Her reflection in a small cracked mirror hanging by the door showed a woman she barely recognized, eyes too large and a face that had grown lean from years of hardship, but with a determination that hadn't been there before. "Where are we heading today?" she asked as they saddled the horses. "West for a while, then north," Ryder replied. "We need to avoid the main trails. Holdsworth has men all over this territory." "How far to this meeting with Marshal Cooper?" 2 days' ride if we push it." He tightened the cinch on his saddle, "but we'll need to be careful. If Holdsworth realizes we're heading for a federal marshal, he'll throw everything he has at stopping us." They mounted up as the sun cleared the horizon, casting long shadows across the corral. Tallulah took one last look at the line shack that had provided them sanctuary for the night, knowing that such moments of safety would be rare in the days ahead. The morning was clear and cool as they rode through increasing stands of pine and oak. The Davis Mountains rose around them, their rugged beauty a stark contrast to the flat plains they had crossed the day before. In different circumstances, Tallulah might have found the scenery breathtaking, but today, her eyes were constantly scanning for danger. "Do you think they're still following us?" she asked as they paused to water the horses at a small spring around midday. Ryder knelt to examine some tracks in the soft earth near the water. "Not directly, but they'll have men watching the passes." He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "We'll take the high trail. It's rougher going, but less likely to be watched." The high trail proved to be exactly as Ryder had described, a narrow path that clung to the mountainside, occasionally disappearing altogether among the rocks. In places, they had to dismount and lead the horses, picking their way carefully across loose scree that threatened to slide away beneath their feet. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered over the mountains, and a cold wind began to blow from the north. Tallulah pulled Ryder's woolen blanket tighter around her shoulders as the first drops of rain began to fall. "There's a cave system about a mile ahead," Ryder called over his shoulder, his voice nearly lost in a sudden gust of wind. "We can shelter there until this passes." The rain quickly turned to a downpour, soaking them both despite their efforts to hurry. By the time they reached the cave entrance, a dark opening in the mountainside partially concealed by juniper, Tallulah was shivering uncontrollably, her clothes plastered to her skin. Inside, the cave opened into a surprisingly large chamber with a high ceiling. Ryder quickly set about gathering wood from a pile near the entrance. Clearly he or someone else had used this place before, and soon had a small fire burning. The horses, tethered near the cave mouth, nickered softly as they shook the rain from their coats. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Ryder said matter-of-factly, turning his back to give her privacy. "I've got a spare shirt in my saddlebags. It'll be big, but it's dry." Tallulah wanted to protest, but the logic was undeniable. Her teeth were chattering and she could feel the cold seeping into her bones. "Thank you," she managed, accepting the offered shirt, a faded blue chambray that had seen better days. She moved to the far side of the cave and quickly stripped off her sodden blouse and skirt, hanging them on jutting rocks to dry. Ryder's shirt came nearly to her knees, the sleeves rolled up multiple times, still hanging past her fingertips. She wrapped the now damp woolen blanket around her waist for additional coverage, then moved back to the fire. "Better?" Ryder asked, not looking directly at her. "Much," she admitted, holding her hands out to the flames. "Though I fear I'm not cutting a very dignified figure at the moment." That drew a rare smile from him. Dignity's a luxury in situations like this. He had removed his own wet coat and hung it beside her clothes, but otherwise remained fully dressed despite the dampness of his shirt and pants. Tallulah noticed he still wore his gun belt, the revolver positioned for easy access. "You're expecting trouble," she observed. Ryder poked at the fire with a stick. "I always expect trouble. It's how I've stayed alive." The rain continued to fall heavily outside, turning the world beyond the cave mouth into a gray curtain. Thunder rolled across the mountains, echoing off the cave walls. It was oddly peaceful despite the storm's fury, or perhaps because of it. For a few hours at least, the weather would keep any pursuers at bay. "How did you learn about Judge Patterson being corrupt?" Tallulah asked after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. Ryder leaned back against the cave wall. "After Luke died, I started paying attention to patterns. Which cases Holdsworth won in court, which judges ruled in his favor, which lawmen looked the other way when his men broke the law." His expression hardened. Patterson's name kept coming up. Too many coincidences to be chance. "And this Marshal Cooper, you're certain he's honest?" "As certain as I can be in this world. He was a friend of my father's years ago, before he joined the Marshal's service. He's been building cases against corruption throughout the territory. Men like Holdsworth stay in power because they isolate their victims, make them feel alone in their fight." Cooper connects the dots. Tallulah hugged her knees to her chest. "For 3 years, I've been collecting scraps of evidence, following leads from town to town. Sometimes I'd get work in places where former bank employees had settled, hoping they might know something. Other times I'd pose as a potential investor to get close to Holdsworth's associates." She smiled grimly. "It's amazing what men will say in front of a woman they think is just a pretty face." "That's how you found out about your father's ledger," she nodded. "A clerk who'd worked under my father mentioned it after too many whiskeys. Said my father had been suspicious of the bank's accounts for months before he was arrested. The ledger wasn't among his personal effects when I went through them after his death. It took me another year to figure out that he'd hidden it in the false bottom of my mother's jewelry box, the one possession of hers I couldn't bear to sell. Smart man, your father, he was." Tallulah's voice grew soft with remembrance. "Thomas James. He taught mathematics at a school back east before we moved to Texas. He believed in justice and fair play above all else. He would have given anything to protect his family." Her throat tightened. "In the end, he gave everything. And your mother died 6 months after him. The doctor called it pneumonia, but really, I think she died of heartbreak. She never believed he was guilty, but watching him go to prison broke something in her. And you've been alone since then." It wasn't a question, but Tallulah answered anyway. "My brother Michael was taken to an orphanage in Austin. He was only 10. I tried to keep him with me, but I had no money, no home. The memory still had the power to hurt. By the time I had saved enough to go back for him, he had been sent west on one of those orphan trains. I've been searching for him too whenever I can. How old would he be now? 13. Almost 14. Tallulah stared into the flames. "Sometimes I wonder if he even remembers me, or if he believes what they all said about our father." Ryder was quiet for a long moment. "Family is family," he said finally. "Some bonds can't be broken, even by time or distance." The simple certainty in his voice was oddly comforting. They fell into silence again, each lost in their own thoughts as the storm continued to rage outside. Eventually, Tallulah felt her eyelids growing heavy, the combination of warmth from the fire and the rhythmic sound of rain lulling her towards sleep. "Rest if you need to," Ryder said, noticing her drowsiness. "I'll keep watch." "You've barely slept," she protested weakly. "I've gone longer without sleep," he assured her. "And we may need to move quickly when this storm passes." Too exhausted to argue, Tallulah curled up on her side near the fire, using her arm as a pillow. The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was Ryder's profile as he stared out at the rain, his expression thoughtful and vigilant. She woke sometime later to the sound of voices, or rather, one voice, speaking softly but intensely. Opening her eyes without moving, Tallulah saw Ryder standing near the cave entrance, his back to her as he addressed someone she couldn't see. "Told you it was too risky," he was saying. "If Holdsworth's men find out you're helping us, "They won't," replied a second voice, a woman's with a slight Spanish accent. "I was careful, just like you taught me. Besides, you need supplies and information." Tallulah shifted slightly to see better. A young Mexican woman stood just inside the cave entrance, her dark hair plastered to her head from the rain, a canvas sack in her hands. "Rosa, you shouldn't have come," Ryder said, his tone softening. "It's too dangerous. For you, perhaps. For me, less so." No one pays attention to a Mexican girl delivering laundry. Rosa handed him the sack. "Food, ammunition, and news. Holdsworth's men are searching every trail between here and Fort Davis. They're offering $500 for information on your whereabouts or the woman's." 500. Ryder whistled softly. "We must have really ruffled his feathers. This is not a joking matter, Ryder." Rosa glanced past him, noticing that Tallulah was awake. "Your friend is listening." Ryder turned, meeting Tallulah's eyes. "Rosa Mendez," he said by way of introduction. "The daughter of the family who owns that line shack, and apparently determined to risk her neck for us." Tallulah sat up, conscious of her odd attire. "I appreciate the risk you're taking, Miss Mendez." Rosa's expression was assessing but not unkind. "So you are the one who stole from Victor Holdsworth. You must be either very brave or very desperate." "Both, I suspect," Ryder answered before Tallulah could respond. He began unpacking the sack Rosa had brought: bread, cheese, dried meat, coffee, and boxes of ammunition for both his revolver and Tallulah's derringer. "There is more," Rosa said, her expression growing serious. "Holdsworth has sent telegrams to every town within 100 miles. He claims you," she looked at Tallulah, "murdered one of his men before robbing him. There is a reward for your capture, dead or alive." Tallulah felt the blood drain from her face. "That's a lie. I never hurt anyone. I just took the letters." "The truth matters little to a man like Holdsworth," Rosa said with a shrug. "He controls the story now." "This changes things," Ryder said, pacing the width of the cave. "We can't risk the main routes at all now. Every bounty hunter and lawman in the territory will be looking for us." "There is a way," Rosa offered hesitantly. "Through the old Apache trails in the high country. My grandfather knows them. He could guide you." Ryder shook his head firmly. "No, I won't put your family at risk." "My grandfather hates Holdsworth more than you do," Rosa insisted. "Ever since his men burned our first ranch because we wouldn't sell our water rights." Tallulah looked between them, understanding dawning. "Your family suffered at his hands too." Rosa nodded. "Many have. Holdsworth builds his empire on the broken backs of others." "My grandfather will help you because it is right, not because you ask." Ryder still seemed reluctant, but Tallulah could see the tactical advantage. "We need to consider it," she said. "If what Rosa says is true, we're facing not just Holdsworth's men now, but lawmen and bounty hunters too. We need every advantage we can get." After a moment of internal struggle, Ryder nodded. "Tell your grandfather we would be grateful for his guidance, but only if he understands the risk." Rosa's smile was quick and satisfied. "He will meet you tomorrow at dawn at the Twin Peaks. You know the place." "I know it," Ryder confirmed, "but that's at least 10 miles from here through rough country." "Then you should leave as soon as the rain stops," Rosa said practically. She moved toward the cave entrance. "I must return before I am missed." "Be careful," Ryder called after her. Rosa paused, looking back with an expression that mingled affection and exasperation. "I am always careful, Cowboy. It is you who takes foolish risks." Her gaze shifted to Tallulah. "Take care of him. He pretends to be made of iron, but he is not." Before either of them could respond, she slipped out into the rain, which had lessened to a steady drizzle. "She seems formidable," Tallulah commented after a moment. Ryder's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "The Mendez women are all like that." Rosa's mother once faced down 3 rustlers with nothing but a cooking pot and her temper. How do you know them so well? Our ranches bordered each other before Holdsworth drove both our families out, and after. He busied himself with laying out the food Rosa had brought. Rosa's family took me in for a time when I was in a dark place after Luke's death. They reminded me there was still good in the world. There was more to the story, Tallulah sensed, but she didn't press. Instead, she joined him by the fire, accepting a piece of the fresh bread and cheese. "Do you trust her grandfather to guide us?" she asked after they had eaten in companionable silence for a while. "With my life," Ryder answered without hesitation. "Eduardo Mendez knows these mountains better than any man alive. If anyone can get us through to Cooper unseen, it's him." They spent the next hour checking their weapons and planning their route to the meeting point Rosa had specified. Outside, the rain finally stopped, and patches of blue sky began to appear between the clouds. "We should move," Ryder said, surveying the clearing weather. "Your clothes should be dry enough now." Tallulah gathered her garments, which were indeed mostly dry if somewhat stiff, and retreated to the back of the cave to change. As she buttoned her blouse, she found herself thinking about the growing complexity of their situation. What had begun as a desperate gambit to clear her father's name had evolved into something larger, a chance to bring down a man who had hurt countless families across the territory. And then there was Ryder himself. In just 2 days, he had gone from stranger to ally to something she couldn't quite define. There was an ease between them that belied their brief acquaintance, a sense of mutual understanding that went beyond their shared enemy. When she emerged, fully dressed once more, Ryder was already saddling the horses. He glanced up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "Ready?" he asked simply. Tallulah nodded, patting the satchel that contained her father's ledger and the letters she'd stolen from Holdsworth's office. "Always." They rode out into the freshly washed landscape, the air crisp and clean after the storm. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, casting golden light across the wet rocks and glistening foliage. Under different circumstances, it would have been a beautiful journey. But beauty was a luxury they couldn't afford to appreciate, not with danger potentially lurking behind every boulder and stand of trees. They rode in silence, Ryder leading the way along game trails and dry creek beds, avoiding the more established paths where they might be seen. As twilight descended, transforming the landscape into a study in blues and purples, they reached a sheltered hollow nestled between 2 rocky outcroppings. A small spring bubbled up from between the rocks, providing fresh water for them and the horses. "We'll rest here for a few hours," Ryder decided, dismounting. "Then travel by night to reach the Twin Peaks by dawn." The hollow offered natural protection from prying eyes and the wind that had begun to pick up as darkness fell. They worked together to make a cold camp, no fire that might be spotted from a distance, and shared more of the provisions Rosa had brought. "Tell me about your brother," Tallulah said as they sat side by side, their backs against a smooth boulder, a blanket shared between them against the growing chill. Ryder was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft with memory. "Luke was my younger brother by 2 years, always laughing, always finding the bright side of things. He could charm the venom out of a rattlesnake." A smile touched his lips briefly. "He was the one who kept peace between Pa and me when we butted heads, which was often. He had a way of making people see reason without making them feel foolish for being unreasonable in the first place." "He sounds like someone I would have liked to know," Tallulah said gently. "Everyone liked Luke. That was his gift." Ryder's fingers absently traced patterns in the dirt beside him. "The day he died, He was checking fences on the North Range. Holdsworth's men had cut our wire 3 times that month, letting their cattle onto our grazing land. Pa was laid up with a broken leg and I was in town getting supplies. His voice hardened. They made it look like his horse had thrown him, but Luke was the best rider in the county, and there were boot prints around his body that didn't match his boots. Did you tell the sheriff, Sheriff Biggs? Ryder's laugh was bitter. He took one look at the scene and declared it an accident. Wouldn't even make a report about the boot prints. That's when I knew for certain that Holdsworth had the law in his pocket. So you decided to find evidence on your own. I tried confronting Holdsworth directly first, Ryder admitted. Walked straight into his office in Alpine and accused him to his face. He rubbed his jaw as if feeling a phantom pain. Got myself beaten half to death by his men for my trouble. When I recovered, I realized I needed to be smarter about it. That's when I started gathering information, making connections with others who'd been wronged by him. Like Marshal Cooper. Cooper had been transferred to the territory about a year earlier. He was looking into land fraud cases involving the railroad. Once he started pulling on that thread, it led straight to Holdsworth's web of corruption. Ryder shifted to look at her more directly. Your father's case might be the piece that finally brings it all together. The thought brought both hope and trepidation to Tallulah's heart. Hope that justice might finally be possible, fear that something would go wrong as it had so many times before. We should try to rest, Ryder said, perhaps sensing her tumultuous emotions. I'll take first watch. Wake me in 3 hours, Tallulah insisted. No arguments this time. He conceded with a nod, and Tallulah settled herself as comfortably as possible on the hard ground, her satchel serving as a pillow. Despite the discomfort, exhaustion claimed her quickly, pulling her into a dreamless sleep. True to his word, Ryder woke her 3 hours later. The night had deepened, stars blazing in breathtaking profusion across the velvet blackness above. Tallulah sat with her back against the boulder, her derringer in her lap while Ryder stretched out nearby. Unlike her, he didn't immediately fall asleep, his breathing remaining measured and alert. I won't let anything happen to you, she said softly. Rest. His eyes, reflecting starlight, met hers. I know, he said simply and closed his eyes. Something warm unfurled in Tallulah's chest at his quiet trust. For so long, she had been entirely self-reliant, never allowing herself to depend on anyone else. But in this moment, watching over Ryder as he finally surrendered to sleep, she realized that trust went both ways. He had placed his safety in her hands, just as she had placed hers in his. The night passed without incident, a blessing for which Tallulah was profoundly grateful. She woke Ryder an hour before dawn, and they prepared to move out in the gray pre-dawn light. The horses, rested and watered, seemed to sense the importance of the day ahead, standing quietly as they were saddled. The Twin Peaks are just beyond that ridge, Ryder said, pointing to a silhouette barely visible in the dim light. We'll approach from the east, staying under tree cover as much as possible. They rode at a steady pace, alert for any sign of pursuit or danger. The landscape grew increasingly rugged as they ascended, the trail sometimes barely wide enough for the horses to pass single file. Pine and juniper gave way to bare rock and stunted vegetation. As they neared the peaks, 2 nearly identical stone formations that thrust upward from the mountain ridge like the horns of a massive buried creature. As the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern horizon, they reached a small plateau nestled between the 2 peaks. A lone figure awaited them, sitting on a boulder beside a sturdy mule. The old man rose as they approached, his weathered face creasing into a smile that revealed several missing teeth. Ryder Daniels, he called in a surprisingly strong voice. Still causing trouble wherever you go, I see. Ryder dismounted and approached the old man with evident respect. "Eduardo, thank you for coming." "Bah," Eduardo waved a dismissive hand, as if I would miss the chance to put a thorn in Holdsworth's side. He turned his sharp gaze to Tallulah. "And this is the brave señorita who stole from under the snake's nose." Tallulah slid from her saddle and offered her hand. "Tallulah James, I'm grateful for your help, Mr. Mendez." The old man clasped her hand firmly. "My granddaughter says you are hunting justice, not vengeance. Is this true?" "It is," Tallulah confirmed, "though I won't pretend I haven't thought about vengeance as well." Eduardo's laugh was like dry leaves rustling. "Honest, I like that." He released her hand and turned to survey the surrounding terrain. "We must move quickly. Holdsworth's dogs are searching every pass and trail between here and Fort Davis." "Rosa mentioned Apache trails," Ryder said. "Are they passable for horses?" "For good horses and better riders, yes." Eduardo's eyes twinkled with challenge. "Are you still the horseman you once were, Ryder Daniels, or has town living softened you?" "Try me, old man," Ryder replied with a hint of a smile. Eduardo mounted his mule with surprising agility for his age. "Then we go. The trails I know will take us north through the high country, then west toward the Rio Grande. Your Marshal Cooper is meeting you at Presidio, yes?" Ryder nodded, exchanging a quick glance with Tallulah. They hadn't discussed their destination in detail, but she understood the need for discretion. 3 days' journey if all goes well, Eduardo continued. Longer if we must hide from Holdsworth's men, but they do not know these paths. My ancestors walked them for centuries before the white man, or Mexican, ever claimed this land. He led them away from the plateau, following what appeared to be a game trail that wound steeply upward toward a narrow gap between towering rocks. The trail soon became so faint that Tallulah would have lost it entirely without Eduardo's guidance. In places, it seemed to vanish altogether, only to reappear around a bend or over a rise. By midday, they had climbed high enough that Tallulah could look back and see for miles across the rugged landscape. In the far distance, dust clouds betrayed the movement of riders on the main trail's Holdsworth's men, most likely still searching for them. "They hunt where they expect to find you," Eduardo observed, following her gaze. "That is their weakness. They cannot imagine paths they have never walked." The old man's words held wisdom that went beyond their immediate situation. How many times in her life had Tallulah been constrained by what she thought possible rather than what might actually be achieved? Her pursuit of justice had forced her outside conventional paths, teaching her to see opportunities where others might see only obstacles. They continued their journey through the afternoon, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and take water. Eduardo maintained a punishing pace, but neither Tallulah nor Ryder complained. Every mile put between them and their pursuers was a mile closer to safety. As evening approached, Eduardo led them to a hidden dell surrounded by massive boulders. A small spring provided fresh water, and the natural rock formation offered protection from both weather and unfriendly eyes. "We will camp here," Eduardo announced. "It is safe to make fire. The rocks will hide the light, and the smoke will disperse before it can be seen from below." While Ryder tended to the horses, Tallulah helped Eduardo gather wood and build a small fire in a ring of stones that showed signs of previous use. The old man moved with the ease of someone intimately familiar with both the task and the terrain. "You have used this place before," Tallulah observed. Eduardo nodded. "Many times. When the army was hunting Apache in these mountains, my grandfather helped hide many families in places like this." He arranged the kindling with practiced hands. Later, When Mexican bandits raided across the border, my father brought our family here for safety. And now you use it to hide us from Holdsworth's men, Tallulah said. History repeats itself. The faces of the enemy change, but the struggle remains the same, Eduardo agreed. Always there are those who seek power over others, and always there are those who resist. He spoke with such simple certainty that Tallulah found herself drawing strength from it. In his worldview, their fight against Holdsworth wasn't just a personal vendetta but part of an age-old struggle for justice. Ryder joined them, carrying his saddlebags and rifle. "Horses are settled," he reported, dropping his gear beside the fire. "No sign of pursuit that I could see." "There will not be, not on this trail," Eduardo said confidently. "But tomorrow we must cross open ground for a short distance. That will be the dangerous time." They shared a meal of dried meat, hard bread, and coffee as darkness settled fully around them. The night grew cold quickly at this elevation, and Tallulah found herself sitting closer to the fire, grateful for its warmth. "May I ask what is in these papers that makes Holdsworth hunt you so fiercely?" Eduardo asked, gesturing toward the satchel that never left Tallulah's side. She hesitated, then decided the old man deserved to know what he was risking his life for. "My father was falsely accused of stealing from Holdsworth's bank. These papers prove that Holdsworth himself took the money and framed my father for it." Eduardo's eyes narrowed. "And your father? What happened to him?" "He died in territorial prison, still waiting for a trial that never came." Tallulah couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "They said it was pneumonia, but he had been badly beaten by the guards." The old man crossed himself. "I am sorry, child. To lose family to injustice is a wound that never fully heals." "No," Tallulah agreed softly. "It doesn't. But justice can help the wound to close if not heal completely," Ryder added, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. "That's what we're fighting for." Eduardo looked between them, a knowing expression crossing his weathered features. "You two are well matched," he observed. "Both carrying old pain, both seeking to right wrongs rather than surrender to them." Tallulah felt warmth rise to her cheeks at the implication in the old man's words. She and Ryder were allies of necessity, nothing more. Yet even as she formed the thought, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Something was growing between them, a connection forged in shared purpose and mutual respect that might, given time and different circumstances, become something deeper. "We should rest," Ryder said, perhaps sensing her discomfort. "Tomorrow will be challenging if we have to cross open ground." They arranged their bedrolls around the fire, with Eduardo insisting on taking the first watch despite Ryder's protests. "I need less sleep than young people," the old man declared firmly. "And my eyes see well in the dark. It is decided." Too tired to argue, Ryder and Tallulah prepared for sleep. As Tallulah arranged her blanket, she found Ryder watching her from across the fire, his expression thoughtful. "What is it?" she asked quietly. He seemed to debate whether to speak, then said, "Just thinking about what Eduardo said, about us being well matched." Tallulah's heart beat a little faster. "Oh. I've been hunting Holdsworth for 5 years, he continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Sometimes it feels like that's all I am now, a man bent on justice to the exclusion of everything else." "I understand that feeling," she admitted. "There are days when I can barely remember who I was before all this began." Ryder nodded slowly. "But these past few days, riding with you, I've started to remember there might be more to life than just settling old scores." The simple admission hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Tallulah didn't know how to respond, or even if she should. Their situation was too precarious, the future too uncertain. "We should sleep," she said finally, echoing his earlier suggestion. Ryder held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded. "Good night, Tallulah." "Good night, Ryder." She lay down, pulling her blanket up to her chin against the mountain chill. Sleep was slow to come, her mind racing with thoughts of justice and vengeance, of loss and potential new beginnings. When it finally claimed her, her dreams were a confused tangle of running and searching, with Ryder's steady presence always just at the edge of her awareness. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost glittering on the rocks around their campsite. They broke camp quickly, Eduardo once again setting a brisk pace as they continued their journey north through the high country. By mid-morning, they had reached the open ground Eduardo had warned them about, a broad saddle between two mountain ridges, covered in sparse grass and scattered boulders, but offering little in the way of cover. From their vantage point at the edge of the tree line, they could see the entire expanse, perhaps half a mile across, baking under the Texas sun. "We must cross quickly," Eduardo said, scanning the terrain with narrowed eyes. "One at a time with intervals between. I will go first to make sure the way is clear." Before either Ryder or Tallulah could protest, the old man had urged his mule forward, moving at a surprisingly rapid pace across the open ground. They watched tensely as he made his way to the opposite side, finally disappearing into the trees there. "I'll go next," Ryder decided. "Wait until I'm halfway across before you start. If anything happens, if there's any sign of trouble, turn back and ride east. There's a settlement of friendly Apache about 20 miles that way." Tallulah shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving you, Tallulah." His voice was low and intense. "What you're carrying is too important. If something happens to me, you need to get those papers to Cooper. Promise me." She wanted to refuse, to insist they would cross safely together, but the logic of his argument was undeniable. "I promise," she said reluctantly. "But nothing is going to happen to you." Ryder's mouth curved in a brief smile. "Your confidence is touching." He gathered his reins. "Remember, wait until I'm halfway." Tallulah watched anxiously as he rode out into the open, his figure becoming smaller with distance. The crossing seemed to take an eternity, though in reality it was probably no more than a few minutes. When Ryder had reached the midpoint, she took a deep breath and urged her mare forward. The exposure of the open ground was unnerving after days of traveling through concealing forests and rocky terrain. Tallulah felt as though eyes were watching from every direction, though a quick scan of the surrounding ridges revealed no movement. She kept her mare at a steady trot, fast enough to minimize their time in the open, but not so fast as to tire the horse unnecessarily. She was 3/4 of the way across when the first shot rang out. The report echoed across the saddle, followed immediately by the distinctive whine of a bullet passing too close to her head. Tallulah instinctively flattened herself against her horse's neck, digging her heels into the mare's sides to urge her to greater speed. More shots followed, kicking up dust around her. From the cover of the trees ahead, she could see Ryder and Eduardo returning fire, providing covering fire as she raced the final distance. A burning sensation along her upper arm told her one bullet had found its mark, but there was no time to assess the damage. She drove her horse onward, the animal's fear adding speed to its stride. The final yards seemed to stretch endlessly before her, but finally she plunged into the relative safety of the trees. Ryder was there immediately, grabbing her horse's bridle with one hand while continuing to fire with the other. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his eyes quickly scanning her for injuries. "Just grazed," Tallulah managed, suddenly aware of warm blood trickling down her arm. "Where are they?" "Ridge to the south," Eduardo answered, pointing with his rifle. "At least 3 men. They must have been watching the open ground." "We need to move," Ryder said, helping Tallulah dismount. "Can you ride?" she nodded, gritting her teeth against the pain that was now making itself known in earnest. "I'm fine. Let's go." They mounted quickly and followed Eduardo deeper into the forest, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. The old man led them on a winding path that doubled back on itself several times, making it difficult for anyone to follow their trail. After nearly an hour of hard riding, Eduardo finally called a halt beside a small stream that tumbled down from the heights above. "We can stop here briefly," he said. "They will not find us easily, and your wound needs attention." Tallulah had been doing her best to ignore the throbbing pain in her arm, but now as she dismounted, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Ryder was at her side instantly, supporting her with a strong arm around her waist. "Let me see," he said, guiding her to sit on a fallen log. The bullet had torn through the sleeve of her blouse and left a bloody furrow along the outside of her upper arm. Not life-threatening, but painful and bleeding freely. Ryder's expression darkened as he examined the wound. "This needs cleaning and bandaging." Eduardo approached with a small leather pouch. "I have medicines," he offered, "plants that will help with pain and prevent the bad blood sickness." While Ryder carefully cleaned the wound with water from the stream, Eduardo crushed various leaves and roots into a paste. The old man muttered what sounded like prayers or incantations as he worked, his gnarled fingers moving with surprising dexterity. "This will sting," he warned before applying the paste to Tallulah's wound. That proved to be an understatement. The mixture burned like fire, and Tallulah couldn't suppress a gasp of pain. Ryder's hand found hers, offering silent support as Eduardo finished his work and bound the wound with a clean cloth. "It will heal clean," the old man pronounced. "The plants will draw out any poison and ease the pain soon." True to his word, within minutes the burning sensation had faded to a dull throb, and Tallulah felt her head clearing. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Both of you." Ryder squeezed her hand once before releasing it. "Those men were watching the crossing specifically. They knew we might come that way." Eduardo nodded grimly. "Holdsworth has more resources than I expected. We must be even more careful now." "How much farther to Presidio?" Tallulah asked. 2 days, perhaps 3 with the need for greater caution," Eduardo replied. "We will avoid open ground entirely, even if it means a longer journey." They rested only long enough for the horses to drink and for Tallulah to regain her strength before continuing onward. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as Eduardo led them through ravines and across rocky slopes that would have seemed impassable to less experienced riders. By nightfall, they had put considerable distance between themselves and their pursuers. Eduardo guided them to another hidden campsite, this one a shallow cave set into a cliff face, accessible only by a narrow path that wound up from the valley below. "No fire tonight," the old man decided. "We are too exposed." They made a cold camp, sharing the last of Rosa's provisions in the gathering darkness. Tallulah's arm ached dully, but the bleeding had stopped, and she was grateful for Eduardo's herbal remedy that kept the worst of the pain at bay. As they settled in for the night, Ryder positioned himself near the cave entrance, his rifle across his knees. The moonlight silvered his profile, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the determined set of his mouth. "You should rest," Tallulah said, moving to sit beside him. "I can take first watch." He glanced at her wounded arm. "You need to heal. It's just a graze," she insisted. "And I'm not helpless." A smile touched his lips. "That's the last word anyone would use to describe you," his expression sobered. "You could have been killed today, but I wasn't." She met his gaze steadily. "That's the risk we both accepted when we started this journey." Ryder was quiet for a moment, looking out at the moonlit landscape. When I first saw you in that alley in Marfa, running from Holdsworth's men, I helped you because it was the right thing to do, and because any enemy of Holdsworth's was potentially an ally." He turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't expect to find someone I'd come to." He trailed off, but the unspoken word hung in the air between them. "To what?" Tallulah asked softly, her heart beating faster. Instead of answering directly, Ryder reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "To care about," he said finally, "more than just as an ally in this fight." The simple admission sent a wave of warmth through Tallulah's chest. For 3 years, she had kept people at a distance, afraid to form attachments that might complicate her quest or, worse, put others in danger. But here, in this remote cave with danger still pursuing them, she found herself wanting to lower those carefully constructed walls. "I've been running for so long," she whispered. "Not just from Holdsworth, but from everything, connections, possibilities, anything that might distract me from clearing my father's name." "And now?" Ryder asked, his voice equally quiet. Tallulah took a deep breath. "Now I'm starting to wonder if there might be room for both justice for my father and something more." In the silver moonlight, Ryder's eyes were dark and intent on hers. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward until his lips met hers in a gentle kiss. It was brief, almost hesitant, but it sent a current of electricity racing through Tallulah's veins. When they parted, she found herself breathless, her wounded arm forgotten. "Something more," Ryder echoed, his voice husky. "I'd like that." From the back of the cave came the sound of Eduardo loudly clearing his throat. "If you two are finished making eyes at each other, perhaps one of you could keep watch while the other sleeps," the old man suggested, amusement evident in his tone despite the darkness. "We still have a long journey ahead." Tallulah felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Ryder chuckled softly. "He's right," he admitted. "We should rest while we can." His hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing gently. "We'll have time to talk more later, promise?" she asked, surprised by the vulnerability in her own voice. "Promise," he replied firmly. With that assurance warming her heart, Tallulah returned to her bedroll, leaving Ryder to take the first watch. Despite the day's dangers and her throbbing arm, she fell asleep with a sense of hope that had been absent from her life for far too long. The next 2 days passed in a blur of cautious travel through increasingly rugged terrain. Eduardo led them on paths that seemed to exist only in his memory, winding through canyons and along ridge lines that kept them hidden from searching eyes. They encountered no more of Holdsworth's men, but the constant vigilance and difficult travel took its toll on all of them. By the time they reached the outskirts of Presidio, late on the 3rd afternoon, even the indomitable Eduardo was showing signs of fatigue. The town itself lay in a dusty valley along the Rio Grande, the river forming a natural border between Texas and Mexico. From their vantage point in the hills above, Presidio looked like most frontier towns, a collection of adobe and wooden buildings strung along a main street, with scattered dwellings and corrals on the outskirts. "Marshal Cooper will meet us at a place called Domingo's," Ryder explained as they prepared for the final leg of their journey. "It's a cantina on the edge of town, owned by a friend of his." "How will we know it's safe?" Tallulah asked, adjusting her hat to better shield her face. The wound on her arm had healed remarkably well thanks to Eduardo's herbal poultice, but she was still wary of attracting attention. "Cooper will have men watching the approaches," Ryder replied, "and Eduardo knows signals to identify us as friendly." The old man nodded. "I have done this before with your martial friend. He is cautious, which is good." They descended toward the town as dusk began to settle, taking a circuitous route that kept them away from the main road. Eduardo led them to a small stable behind what appeared to be a modest adobe cantina on the outskirts of Presidio. A young Mexican man emerged from the shadows as they approached, greeting Eduardo in rapid Spanish. After a brief exchange, he motioned for them to dismount and led their horses into the stable. "Miguel will care for the animals," Eduardo explained. "He is Domingo's son and trustworthy. Come." He led them to a rear entrance of the cantina. Inside, the main room was dimly lit and sparsely populated, just a few patrons at scattered tables and a bartender polishing glasses behind a scarred wooden bar. The air was thick with the scent of chilies, tobacco, and beer. Eduardo exchanged a nod with the bartender, who tilted his head toward a door at the back of the room. Without a word, the old man guided Tallulah and Ryder toward it, knocking once before opening it. The room beyond was small but comfortable, with a table in the center surrounded by several chairs. A man rose as they entered, tall and broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. The badge on his chest caught the lamplight as he moved forward to greet them. "Eduardo, old friend," he said warmly, clasping the older man's hand. "You made good time." "Not without difficulty," Eduardo replied. "Holdsworth's men found us at the crossing." The marshal's expression darkened. "Anyone hurt?" "The señorita took a bullet graze, but it is healing well." Eduardo gestured toward Tallulah. "Marshal Cooper, this is Tallulah James and Ryder Daniels." Cooper shook hands with each of them, his grip firm and his gaze assessing. "Ryder, it's been too long. And Miss James, I've been hearing about you for several days now. Holdsworth has quite a price on your head." "All based on lies," Tallulah said firmly. "I never doubted that for a moment," Cooper assured her. "Victor Holdsworth has been a thorn in the side of justice in this territory for far too long. Please sit. We have much to discuss." They settled around the table, and the marshal poured coffee from a pot that sat on a small stove in the corner. Once they were all served, he leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "Before we go any further, you should know that Holdsworth arrived in Presidio this morning with a dozen men," he said without preamble. "He's been to the local sheriff's office, and he's offering $500 for information on your whereabouts." Tallulah felt her heart sink. "He followed us all this way. He's desperate," Ryder observed, "which means he knows exactly how damaging that evidence you're carrying could be." Cooper nodded in agreement. "The fact that he's here personally tells me he's running scared. Now tell me what you have." Tallulah placed her satchel on the table and carefully extracted her father's ledger and the letters she'd stolen from Holdsworth's office. "My father was head clerk at Holdsworth's bank in San Antonio 3 years ago. When money started disappearing from certain accounts, Holdsworth framed my father for the embezzlement." She opened the ledger, revealing pages of meticulously recorded transactions in her father's neat handwriting. "My father suspected something was wrong months before he was arrested. He kept this secret record of all the discrepancies. He found funds transferred between accounts without proper authorization, withdrawals that never reached their intended recipients." Cooper examined the ledger with practiced eyes. "Your father had a methodical mind." "He was a mathematics teacher before we moved to Texas," Tallulah explained. "Numbers were his life." "And these?" Cooper asked, indicating the letters. "Correspondence between Holdsworth and various officials, judges, sheriffs, bankers. Some are explicit about bribes, others use coded language, but the meaning is clear. He was building a network of corruption across the territory." The marshal's expression grew increasingly grim as he read through the documents. "This is even worse than I suspected," he murmured. Holdsworth has his fingers in everything from land deals to cattle rustling, all protected by corrupt officials. He looked up at Tallulah. Your father must have realized the extent of it. Which is why Holdsworth made sure he never got to trial, Ryder interjected. A man with this kind of knowledge was too dangerous to allow into a courtroom, even a corrupt one. My father died in prison before he could testify, Tallulah confirmed, her voice tight with old pain. They said it was pneumonia, but you suspect otherwise, Cooper finished for her. And based on what I'm seeing here, your suspicions are likely correct. He gathered the papers carefully. Miss James, these documents, combined with the evidence I've been gathering, are enough to bring federal charges against Holdsworth and at least a dozen officials throughout the territory. Hope, so long deferred, bloomed in Tallulah's chest. You can clear my father's name. I can do more than that, Cooper promised. I can make sure everyone knows he was a hero who died trying to expose corruption at the highest levels. Tears pricked at Tallulah's eyes, and she felt Ryder's hand close over hers beneath the table, offering silent support. What happens now? Ryder asked. Cooper closed the ledger. Now we get these documents to safety and prepare to move against Holdsworth. I have a federal judge waiting in El Paso who isn't in Holdsworth's pocket. Once these papers are in his hands, we can start issuing arrest warrants. Holdsworth won't go quietly, Eduardo warned. He has many men and they are well armed. Which is why I brought a dozen deputies with me, Cooper replied with a grim smile. They're scattered around town, keeping an eye on Holdsworth and his men. But first, we need to get Miss James and these documents out of Presidio safely. When? Tallulah asked. Tonight, Cooper decided. I have a wagon leaving for El Paso in 2 hours with an escort of my most trusted men. You'll both go with it. Ryder shook his head. I'm staying. I've been hunting Holdsworth for 5 years. I want to be here when you take him down. Ryder, Tallulah began, alarmed at the thought of separation after all they'd been through. It's not about vengeance anymore, he assured her, squeezing her hand. It's about seeing justice done. For Luke, for your father, for all the others Holdsworth has hurt. He looked at Cooper. You could use another gun you can trust. The marshal studied him for a moment, then nodded. We could at that. But Miss James needs to go with the documents. Her testimony will be crucial. Tallulah wanted to protest, to insist on staying with Ryder, but she knew Cooper was right. The evidence she carried and her own testimony were too important to risk. I'll go, she agreed reluctantly, but I want your word that you'll keep him safe. Cooper's expression softened. As much as anyone can be kept safe in a situation like this. But Ryder's a capable man and he knows what he's doing. Eduardo, who had been listening quietly, now spoke up. I will stay as well. My eyes are still sharp and my rifle hand steady enough. I won't turn down the help of a man who knows these mountains better than anyone, Cooper said with a nod of respect. Now, we should prepare. Holdsworth has men watching the main roads, but there's a route east through the river shallows that we can use to get the wagon out undetected. As Cooper and Eduardo discussed the details of the plan, Ryder drew Tallulah aside to a quiet corner of the room. I don't like the idea of separating, she admitted, looking up at him. Neither do I, he said softly, but Cooper's right. Those documents and your testimony are what will finally bring Holdsworth down. That has to be the priority. And what about? She hesitated, uncertain how to define what had begun to grow between them. Ryder's hand came up to cup her cheek. That's not ending, Tallulah. Once this is over, once Holdsworth is behind bars and your father's name is cleared. He took a deep breath. I'd like the chance to see what we might become together, if you want that too. The simple sincerity in his voice made Tallulah's heart swell. I do, she whispered. I want that very much. He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face and made her breath catch. "Then I have something to come back to, a reason beyond justice. Promise me you'll be careful," she insisted. "No heroics." "I promise to be as careful as the situation allows," he amended, knowing better than to make promises he might not be able to keep. It would have to be enough. Tallulah stood on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, no longer caring who might see. After 3 years of running, of keeping everyone at arm's length, she had found someone worth taking a risk for. The kiss was both a promise and a plea. "Come back to me." When they parted, Ryder pressed his forehead to hers for a moment. "2 days to El Paso," he murmured. "I'll be there as soon as we've finished things here." "I'll hold you to that, Cowboy," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Cooper cleared his throat discreetly. "It's time, Miss James. The wagon is being prepared." The next hour passed in a flurry of preparations. Tallulah was provided with fresh clothing to help disguise her appearance, a simple dress and shawl that might belong to any frontier woman. Her precious satchel of documents was hidden in a false bottom of a trunk, filled with dry goods and household supplies. Before she knew it, she was seated in the back of a canvas-covered wagon alongside 2 deputies disguised as traders. The town of Presidio disappearing into the darkness behind them as they forded the shallow part of the Rio Grande and headed east on a little used trail. Her last sight of Ryder had been of him standing beside Cooper, his expression resolute but his eyes holding a promise that transcended words. She clung to that image as the wagon bumped along through the night, carrying her toward safety and, hopefully, justice at last. The journey to El Paso took just over 2 days, following routes that avoided main roads and potential ambush points. They traveled mostly at night and hid during daylight hours, a precaution that proved wise when they twice spotted riders in the distance who matched the description of Holdsworth's men. Tallulah spent the time alternating between anxiety over what might be happening in Presidio and planning what she would say to the federal judge in El Paso. The deputies accompanying her were professional and courteous but not talkative, which suited her introspective mood. By the time they reached El Paso, Tallulah was exhausted but determined. The city was significantly larger than Presidio, with brick buildings alongside adobe structures and a bustling commerce that reflected its position on the border between the United States and Mexico. They were taken directly to a substantial building that served as the federal courthouse and offices. Inside, Tallulah was introduced to Judge Harlan Thornton, a stern-faced man with piercing gray eyes and an air of uncompromising integrity. For the next several hours, she laid out her evidence and testimony, watching as the judge's expression grew increasingly grave. He asked sharp, precise questions that demonstrated both his intelligence and his thorough understanding of the law. "Miss James," he said finally, after examining the last of the documents, "your father would be proud of what you've accomplished. These records, combined with Marshal Cooper's existing evidence, constitute one of the most comprehensive cases of corruption I've seen in my 30 years on the bench." Tallulah felt tears sting her eyes at the mention of her father. "Will it be enough, Your Honor?" "More than enough," the judge assured her. "I'm issuing warrants immediately for Holdsworth and his known associates, as well as for the corrupt officials named in these documents. Cooper should receive them by messenger within the day. And my father's name will be fully cleared. I'll see to it personally that a formal declaration of his innocence is published in every newspaper from here to San Antonio." Judge Thornton's stern demeanor softened slightly. "It won't bring him back, Miss James, but it will ensure that history remembers him correctly as a man of principle who died trying to expose wrongdoing." It was more than Tallulah had dared to hope for all these years. "Thank you, Your Honor." After the meeting with the judge, she was escorted to a modest but comfortable hotel room with instructions to remain there until word came from Presidio. A deputy was stationed in the hallway for her protection, a precaution that seemed prudent given Holdsworth's resources and desperation. The waiting was agonizing. Tallulah paced the small room, her thoughts constantly returning to Ryder and what might be happening in Presidio. Had the arrest warrants arrived? Had Holdsworth been taken into custody, or had he resisted? Was Ryder safe? It was late on the second day when a knock finally came at her door. Tallulah rushed to open it, her heart pounding with hope and fear. Marshal Cooper stood in the hallway, his clothing dusty from the road but a satisfied expression on his face. And beside him, looking weary but whole, was Ryder. "It's done," Cooper said simply. "Holdsworth is in custody, along with most of his men. The judge's warrants arrived yesterday morning, and we moved immediately." Tallulah's eyes were fixed on Ryder, taking in the bandage visible at his collar and the bruising along his jawline. "You're hurt," she said, stepping back to let them enter. "Nothing serious," Ryder assured her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Holdsworth didn't surrender easily." "Tell me everything," she insisted, gesturing for them to sit. Cooper took a chair by the window while Ryder sat beside Tallulah on the small settee. The marshal recounted how they had surrounded Holdsworth and his men at the hotel where they were staying in Presidio. "We expected resistance, and we got it," he said grimly. Holdsworth had positioned lookouts and had an escape route planned through the back of the hotel, but thanks to Eduardo's knowledge of the town, we had that covered too. "There was a firefight," Ryder continued. "Holdsworth and 3 of his men tried to shoot their way out. 2 of my deputies were wounded, but not seriously. Eduardo took a bullet through his hat but is otherwise unscathed." "And your injuries?" Tallulah asked, her eyes on the bandage at his neck. "Caught the edge of a bullet when Holdsworth himself tried to make a final stand," Ryder admitted. "Just a graze, not unlike yours. And this," he gestured to the bruising on his jaw, "was from one of his men who thought he could win a fist fight." "Did he?" Tallulah asked, a hint of a smile finally touching her lips. "Not even close," Cooper interjected with a chuckle. "Your cowboy here may look civilized, but he fights like he was raised by wolves." "He's not my cowboy," Tallulah protested automatically, then caught Ryder's raised eyebrow and felt heat rise to her cheeks. "At least, not officially." "Yet," Ryder murmured, just loudly enough for her to hear. Cooper, demonstrating a lawman's tactful discretion, stood and moved toward the door. "I should report to Judge Thornton. He'll want to know the details of the arrest before the preliminary hearing tomorrow." He paused, looking back at Tallulah. "Your presence will be required, Miss James, but not until 10 o'clock. "I'll be there," she promised. With a knowing nod to Ryder, the marshal departed, leaving them alone. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, absorbing the reality that it was truly over Holdsworth was in custody. The evidence was in the hands of an honest judge, and justice was finally within reach. "You did it," Ryder said softly. "Your father's name will be cleared." "We did it," Tallulah corrected him. "I couldn't have done this alone." He reached out to take her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "What will you do now, after the trial, I mean?" It was a question Tallulah had asked herself repeatedly over the past few days. For so long, her entire existence had been defined by her quest for justice. Now that it was nearly accomplished, what came next? "I still need to find my brother," she said after a moment. "Michael is out there somewhere, and he deserves to know the truth about our father." Ryder nodded. "Cooper has connections throughout the territories. He might be able to help track down records from the orphan trains. And after that, Tallulah took a deep breath. I don't know. For 3 years, clearing my father's name has been my only purpose. I haven't allowed myself to think beyond that. Maybe now you can, Ryder suggested, his voice gentle. Maybe now you can stop running and start building something new. The echo of his words from days ago, stop running, stand with me instead, resonated in Tallulah's heart. She looked up at him, seeing in his eyes the same hope that was beginning to bloom in her own chest. I'd like that, she said simply, to stop running, to build something new. She hesitated, then added, with you if that's what you want. Ryder's smile was slow and sure. It's what I want more than anything. He reached up to cup her face in his hand. I know it's fast, and I know we've only known each other a short time, but these past days, Tallulah, I've never met anyone like you. Your courage, your determination, your heart. Even though I dragged you into danger and got you shot, she asked, only half joking. Especially because of that, he replied with a soft laugh. Life with you would never be dull, that's certain. Life with me, she repeated, testing the phrase. After years of solitude and constant movement, the idea of sharing her life with someone with this man who had risked everything to help her was both terrifying and exhilarating. Yes, Ryder said firmly. When this is all over, when Holdsworth is sentenced and your father's name is cleared, I want to court you properly, Tallulah James. No running, no hiding, no looking over our shoulders, just us, seeing where this leads. In answer, Tallulah leaned forward and kissed him, pouring into the gesture all the emotions she couldn't yet fully articulate: gratitude, hope, and the beginning of something that felt remarkably like love. His arms encircled her, careful of her still healing wound, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. I'll take that as a yes, he murmured. It's a yes, she confirmed, feeling lighter than she had in years. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, testimonies, and revelations. Judge Thornton proved as good as his word, expediting the cases against Holdsworth and his corrupt associates. Tallulah's testimony, combined with her father's ledger and the stolen correspondence, provided the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Victor Holdsworth, once the most powerful man in the region, was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. His sentence was 30 years in the territorial prison, a lifetime for a man of his age. His financial empire was dismantled, with restitution ordered for his many victims, including Tallulah's family. True to the judge's promise, newspapers throughout Texas published the full story of Thomas James's innocence and his heroic efforts to expose corruption. Tallulah kept every clipping, a tangible validation of the quest that had consumed 3 years of her life. With Holdsworth's conviction secured, Tallulah turned her attention to finding her brother. As Ryder had suggested, Marshal Cooper's connections proved invaluable. Records from the orphan train that had carried Michael West were located, and they discovered he had been placed with a farming family near Sacramento, California. Letters were exchanged, and to Tallulah's immense relief, Michael remembered her well and had never believed the lies about their father. His adoptive family, the Rileys, had been kind and loving, but he had never forgotten his original family or given up hope of someday being reunited with his sister. While these developments unfolded, Ryder made good on his promise to court Tallulah properly. They took rooms in a respectable boarding house in El Paso and spent their days getting to know each other outside the pressure of danger and pursuit. Tallulah discovered that Ryder had a dry sense of humor that emerged more frequently as the weight of his 5-year quest for justice lifted. He was well-read despite his frontier upbringing, with a particular fondness for Shakespeare that surprised and delighted her. In turn, she revealed her love of mathematics inherited from her father and her talent for sketching, a hobby she had abandoned during her years on the run, but now resumed with joy. They rode together through the countryside surrounding El Paso, visited the territorial library, and attended the occasional social event. Tallulah found herself laughing more in these weeks than she had in the past 3 years combined, as if a dam had broken inside her, releasing emotions long suppressed. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures to the desert landscape, they made plans for the future. The restitution ordered by the court had provided Tallulah with enough funds to travel to California to see Michael and to potentially establish a new home. "I've been thinking," Ryder said one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. "I still own land near Alpine, part of my family's original ranch that Holdsworth couldn't get his hands on. It's good land, with water rights and grazing enough for a decent herd." "You want to go back to ranching?" Tallulah asked, studying his profile in the fading light. He nodded slowly. "I think I do. It's in my blood. My father and grandfather built something there, something that meant more than just cattle and land. It was a home, a legacy." He turned to look at her directly. "I'd like to rebuild it, and I'd like you to be part of that rebuilding if you're willing." The implication was clear, and Tallulah's heart raced at the sincerity in his eyes. "Are you asking me to marry you, Ryder Daniels?" "I believe I am," he said with a smile, taking her hand in his. "Not perhaps in the most traditional way, but then, nothing about our relationship has been traditional from the start." Tallulah laughed softly. "That's certainly true." Ryder's expression grew serious. "I know you need to go to California first to see Michael. And I know there's no guarantee he'll want to return to Texas with you. But whatever you decide, wherever you need to be, I want to be by your side. Not just courting you, but building a life together." "As husband and wife," Tallulah said, testing the words. "As partners," Ryder corrected gently. "Equal in all things. Your dreams matter as much as mine, Tallulah. If ranching isn't what you want, we'll find another path." The consideration in his words touched her deeply. For so long, she had been defined by her past, by her father's wrongful conviction, by her mother's death, by her separation from her brother. Now, for the first time, she was being invited to define her own future, with a man who saw her not as someone to be protected or directed, but as a true partner. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'd like to see this ranch of yours. And yes, I need to go to California and see Michael. But after that," she squeezed his hand, "after that, I think I'd very much like to become Mrs. Ryder Daniels, rancher's wife and partner in all things." The joy that spread across Ryder's face was answer enough, but he sealed the moment by drawing her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership, respect, and love. 2 weeks later, they were married in a small ceremony at El Paso's Episcopal Church, with Marshall Cooper and Eduardo Mendez as witnesses. Rosa Mendez, who had traveled from Marfa for the occasion, served as Tallulah's maid of honor, while Judge Thornton himself performed the ceremony. The following day, they boarded a westbound train for the first leg of their journey to California, the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. As the train pulled away from the station, Tallulah looked out the window at the Texas landscape rolling by the same landscape she had crossed so many times in her years of running and searching. "Strange to think," she mused, "that a few months ago, I was trying so hard to outrun my past." Ryder, seated beside her, took her hand in his. "And now," She turned to smile at her husband, her heart full of hope for the future they would build together. "Now I'm running toward something instead. With you." "No more running," Ryder said softly, echoing the words that had begun their journey together. "Just standing side by side, facing whatever comes next." "Together," Tallulah agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder as the train carried them westward, toward family, toward healing, and toward the promise of a life filled with love and purpose. 6 months later, the Daniels ranch near Alpine was showing signs of rebirth. New fencing marked the boundaries. A small herd of cattle grazed on the rich grassland, and the ranch house, once abandoned and falling into disrepair, had been restored to a comfortable home. Tallulah stood on the porch, watching as Ryder and Michael worked with a young colt in the corral. Her reunion with her brother in California had been emotional and healing for them both. While the Rileys had been kind and loving guardians, Michael had jumped at the chance to return to Texas with his sister and her new husband, eager to be part of their family and to help build something new. Now 14, Michael was growing tall and strong, thriving in the open air and physical work of ranch life. His relationship with Ryder had developed into a mixture of brotherhood and mentorship that warmed Tallulah's heart every time she witnessed their easy camaraderie. Their extended family had grown as well. Eduardo Mendez visited often, sharing his wisdom about the land and teaching Michael the tracking and survival skills passed down through generations. Rosa and her parents had become regular dinner guests, with Rosa and Tallulah forming a friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences as strong women in a frontier that often underestimated them. Marshall Cooper, now based permanently in El Paso, rode out to the ranch whenever his duties brought him to the area. He had become something of an uncle figure to Michael and a trusted friend to both Tallulah and Ryder. From the garden she had planted beside the house, Tallulah could see the mountains where she had once fled from Holdsworth's men, where she and Ryder had first begun to know each other amidst danger and uncertainty. Now those same mountains stood as sentinels over their new life, a reminder not of fear but of perseverance and triumph. Inside the house, on the mantel above the fireplace, sat several cherished items: her father's exoneration papers in a frame, a small box containing her mother's few remaining pieces of jewelry, the first letter from Judge Thornton informing them that the last of Holdsworth's corrupt associates had been convicted, and a sketch Tallulah had drawn of Ryder and Michael working together to repair the barn roof. As she watched her husband and brother laughing together in the corral, Tallulah placed a hand on her still flat stomach, where the newest member of their family was just beginning to grow. She hadn't told Ryder yet she was saving the news for their 6-month wedding anniversary dinner that evening. Life wasn't perfect. There were still difficult days, times when memories of all they had lost threatened to overwhelm the joy of what they had found. Tallulah sometimes woke in the night, momentarily disoriented and reaching for the derringer she no longer kept beneath her pillow. Ryder occasionally grew quiet and distant on the anniversary of his brother's death, his grief still raw despite the justice that had finally been served. But these moments passed, soothed by their growing love and the family they were building. Each day brought new challenges and new joys, from the practical concerns of running a ranch to the deeper satisfactions of putting down roots after years of transience. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in familiar Texas gold, Ryder looked up from the corral and caught Tallulah's eye. Even at a distance, she could see the love in his smile, a love that had begun in the most unlikely circumstances and had grown stronger with every passing day. He said something to Michael, then vaulted over the corral fence and walked toward her, his stride confident and easy. When he reached the porch, he pulled her gently into his arms, heedless of the dirt and sweat from his day's work. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Daniels," he murmured against her hair. Tallulah leaned back to look up at him, her heart full. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Daniels. I have a gift for you, but you'll have to wait until dinner to receive it." "Oh," his eyes sparkled with curiosity. "A hint, perhaps?" She smiled mysteriously. "Let's just say it's something that will change our lives forever." "Tallulah Daniels, are you trying to drive me mad with curiosity?" Ryder asked, pretending outrage. "Perhaps a little," she admitted with a laugh. "Consider it payback for all those mysterious trails you led me on during our escape from Holdsworth." He laughed and pulled her closer. "Fair enough. I can be patient. Can you?" She teased, knowing full well that patience had never been his strongest virtue. "For you," Ryder said, his voice softening, "I can wait forever if needed." The simple statement held echoes of their journey together of waiting for justice, for safety, for the chance to build something permanent after years of uncertainty. Of a cowboy who had seen a woman running from her past and had offered her the chance to stand with him instead. "I love you," Tallulah said simply, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "And I love you," Ryder replied against her lips, "now and always." As the Texas sunset gilded the land around them, Tallulah James Daniels, once a fugitive, now a wife, sister, and soon-to-be mother, gave thanks for the twist of fate that had brought her to that alley in Marfa months ago. And for the man who had shown her that sometimes the end of running was just the beginning of the most important journey of all.